My sisters and brothers, in moments of deep fear, when the heart pounds and the mind is overwhelmed by what seems like an unstoppable storm, it is natural for a person to feel paralyzed. This is exactly what the believers faced during the Battle of the Confederates, a moment captured in Surah Al-Ahzab. The city of Medina was surrounded by a massive coalition of enemies, their numbers far outmatching the Muslims. The earth beneath their feet felt heavy. Their chests tightened with anxiety, and whispers of doubt crept into the minds of some. It was a time when emotional struggles were at their peak, and fear was not just an idea. It was an intense reality pressing down on them from every side. Yet in the midst of this fear, Allah painted a clear path forward. Trust in Him completely. True faith is not tested in moments of comfort, but in moments when everything inside you screams to give up. The believers knew that their human strength alone could not break the siege. Their resources were limited, their enemies were strong, and the future looked uncertain. But in that uncertainty, they remembered that Allah's promise is certain. They understood that no matter how great the opposition, no one could harm them unless Allah allowed it. This realization transformed their fear into reliance. The hypocrites and the weak in faith began to spread discouragement, whispering that the Muslims were finished, that hope was gone. Yet those who truly believed held on to a deeper truth. They saw the situation not as a sign of Allah abandoning them, but as a chance to prove their faith. Fear no longer became something to hide from. It became a means to run towards Allah. Their hearts became firm, their eyes looked beyond the siege, and they trusted that even if they faced death, it would only be by the will of the one who created them. In our own lives, we may never face an army at our doorstep, but we do face battles of the heart and mind, overwhelming fears, uncertainty about the future, and crushing moments of emotional struggle. It is in these moments that the lesson of Surah Al-Ahzab shines the brightest. Fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a call to place your full weight on Allah, knowing that He is more powerful than anything you face. When you stop measuring the size of your problem and start focusing on the greatness of your Lord, the fear that once crippled you begins to fade. The believers during the Battle of the Confederates emerged victorious not because they had the strongest weapons or the largest army, but because they had unshakable trust in Allah when it mattered most. That is the path to overcoming fear, not denying its existence, but letting it lead you to the one who is greater than all fear. Obedience to Allah is often tested in the moments when it is hardest to obey. It is easy to follow His commands when life feels smooth, when everything is going according to plan, and when our emotions are calm. But the real test of obedience comes when our hearts are heavy, when fear clouds our vision, and when surrendering to Allah's will feels like the most difficult thing to do. In Surah Al-Ahzab, we see this truth unfold during the siege of Medina. The believers were not only under physical attack, but were also faced with emotional and spiritual trials. They were commanded to hold their ground, to remain steadfast, to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam without hesitation, and to maintain trust in Allah's plan no matter how impossible victory seemed. For some, the temptation to give in to fear or to follow their own logic was strong. They questioned the necessity of enduring such hardship. They looked for shortcuts, and some even wished to retreat. But the ones who obeyed unconditionally found strength in a way that defied explanation. Obedience in that moment was not blind submission. It was an act of conscious trust. They understood that Allah sees what we cannot see, that His wisdom is far beyond our immediate understanding, and that His commands are not merely suggestions. They are the keys to our survival both in this life and the next. What makes obedience so powerful during emotional hardship is that it aligns the heart with the will of the one who controls all outcomes. We often try to fight our battles on our own, relying on our own plans, our own strategies, and our own understanding. But obedience is an acknowledgement that our Creator knows the battlefield better than we do. When Allah instructs us to act in a certain way, to be patient, to trust, to persevere, He is not burdening us. He is guiding us to the safest and most victorious path, even if that path is steep and difficult. In our daily lives, this lesson is deeply relevant. When we face emotional struggles, it is natural to want to take the easiest way out. We may want to compromise our values to escape the pressure. We may even convince ourselves that we know a better way than what Allah has decreed. But history and the example in Surah Al-Ahzab shows us that true strength lies in obedience. When you choose to follow Allah's command, even when it contradicts your emotions, you will find that He places within you a strength you did not know you had. Your heart becomes anchored, your mind becomes clearer, and your steps become steady, no matter how strong the storm. The believers who obeyed without hesitation emerged not only victorious, but spiritually elevated. This is the power of obedience. It transforms fear into courage and turns weakness into strength because it connects you directly to the one who never fails. One of the greatest emotional struggles a believer can face is the pressure of public opinion. When you stand for what is right, especially in a world that often celebrates what is wrong, you will find yourself criticized, questioned, and sometimes even ridiculed. In Surah Al-Ahzab, the believers experienced this in an intense and painful way. Not only were they surrounded by enemies on the battlefield, but they were also surrounded by voices of doubt and negativity from within their own city. The hypocrites and those weak in faith whispered constantly, spreading fear and uncertainty. Every choice the believers made was scrutinized, every move was judged, and the emotional weight of this criticism could have broken their resolve. Standing firm under that kind of pressure requires more than just bravery. It requires conviction rooted in faith. The believers knew that their ultimate judge was not the people around them, but Allah. They understood that if their hearts were aligned with His guidance, the opinions of the crowd, whether praise or blame, had no real power over them. This mindset is powerful because it frees you from the exhausting need to please everyone. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself was told by Allah not to obey the disbelievers or hypocrites, but to put complete trust in Allah. This is a reminder that no matter how loud the world becomes, the voice of divine guidance must remain louder in your heart. Social pressure is not only about fear of criticism, it is also about the temptation to conform. In times of emotional vulnerability, it can feel easier to blend in with the crowd, to avoid conflict by staying silent, or to compromise on your values so you do not stand out. But Surah Al-Ahzab shows us that true victory belongs to those who stand firm, even when they stand alone. The believers during the siege were not swayed by those who tried to plant seeds of doubt in their hearts. Instead, they held on tighter to their faith, knowing that pleasing Allah was worth more than pleasing the people. In our own lives, the battlefield may be different, but the struggle is the same. Whether it's in school, at work, among friends, or even within family circles, there will be moments when you're pressured to compromise your values to avoid criticism or gain acceptance. In those moments, remember that the opinions of people are temporary, but the acceptance of Allah is eternal. If you let public opinion dictate your actions, you will always be pulled in different directions. But if you let Allah's guidance lead you, you will find yourself walking a path that is steady, no matter how noisy the world becomes. The believers in Surah Al-Ahzab showed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear or criticism control you. They proved that when you choose Allah over public approval, you gain a strength that no social pressure can break. Patience is one of the hardest virtues to hold on to when life feels like it's falling apart. In moments of trial, when the weight of uncertainty crushes the heart and every passing day feels heavier than the one before, the soul naturally longs for quick relief. During the events described in Surah Al-Ahzab, the believers found themselves in exactly such a situation. The siege around Medina was not a brief test. It dragged on, with hunger gnawing at their bodies, cold winds biting their skin, and the constant threat of attack keeping them awake at night. They didn't know when or how it would end. This is where the lesson of patience becomes so profound. Patience in hardship is not simply waiting for the trial to pass. It is enduring with faith, without letting despair take root. For the believers, patience meant holding on to hope, even when all visible signs pointed toward defeat. It meant continuing to pray, continuing to prepare, and continuing to trust that Allah's promise would come true, even when the enemy appeared stronger and the situation seemed impossible. They understood that Allah's plan operates on His timing, not theirs, and that every delay carried wisdom they might not yet see. In our own lives, we often fall into the trap of wanting instant solutions. When we're hurt, we want immediate healing. When we're wronged, we want immediate justice. When we're struggling, we want instant relief. But trials are often prolonged because they are shaping something within us: strength, resilience, humility, or a deeper connection to Allah. Just as a seed needs time underground before it sprouts, us sometimes need time in the soil of hardship before they can bloom with faith. Patience also requires trust. Without trust in Allah's plan, patience feels like an unbearable burden. But when you know that Allah sees your tears, hears your prayers, and knows your pain better than you know it yourself, patience becomes a shield rather than a weight. It protects you from the whispers of hopelessness and from the impulsive decisions that can lead you astray. The believers in Surah Al-Ahzab did not see the winds that would eventually scatter their enemies, nor did they see the unseen help that was on its way. But they remained patient, and when the moment was right, Allah delivered them in a way they could never have orchestrated themselves. This is the beauty of divine timing. It arrives when we least expect it, and it leaves us humbled by the realization that our own plans could never have matched the perfection of Allah's. Patience in trials is not weakness. It is one of the strongest forms of faith. It is the choice to keep walking when the road is long, to keep believing when the night is dark, and to keep trusting that the dawn will come exactly when Allah wills it. In times of emotional struggle, one of the greatest blessings a believer can have is a living example to follow. During the events of Surah Al-Ahzab, that example was the Prophet Muhammad led for himself. The siege around Medina was not only a physical battle, but a deeply emotional one. Fear was real, hunger was real, exhaustion was real. And yet in the midst of this overwhelming hardship, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood as a pillar of strength, calmness, and unwavering trust in Allah. His presence alone reassured the believers that no matter how great the challenge, they were not abandoned. He did not lead from a place of comfort or distance. He was in the trenches with them, feeling the same cold, the same hunger, and the same uncertainty. When they dug the trench to defend the city, he dug alongside them. When they faced fear, he reminded them of Allah's promises. When they felt weary, his steadfastness gave them the courage to keep going. This is what made his leadership so unique. It was rooted not only in strategy, but in genuine empathy and shared struggle. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not only the messenger of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also the perfect role model in how to handle emotional hardship. He did not pretend that the danger wasn't there. He acknowledged the fear and difficulty, but he never allowed them to overpower his trust in Allah. His words were filled with hope, his actions reflected patience, and his entire demeanor reminded the believers that trials are temporary, but the reward of faith is eternal. For the companions watching the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in action was a living lesson in resilience. It showed them that emotional strength doesn't mean ignoring pain. It means holding on to faith despite the pain. It means leading your heart back to Allah again and again, even when your circumstances are pressing in from every side. His example taught them that leadership during trials is not about having all the answers, but about keeping the focus on the one who does. In our lives, we may not have the blessing of seeing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in person, but we do have his example preserved in the Quran and Sunnah. In moments of emotional struggle, we can look at how he faced criticism, loss, betrayal, and fear, yet remained anchored in patience and trust. By following his example, we find a roadmap for navigating our own difficulties. During the siege, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminded the believers that victory comes from Allah alone, and that trials are part of the journey toward that victory. His life in that moment was a demonstration that even in the darkest of times, guidance is always available if you hold on to faith. And that is why his example remains the light that keeps believers steady when the world around them feels like it is falling apart. When we think about victory, we often imagine it as a result of power, wealth, or superior resources. But the victory described in Surah Al-Ahzab was unlike any other. It was not achieved by overwhelming military strength or human strategies alone, but by unity among the believers and complete reliance on Allah. The Muslims in Medina were outnumbered, surrounded by a coalition of tribes determined to destroy them. From a worldly perspective, their situation was hopeless. Yet they held on to one another, and together they held on to Allah. This unity was not just about standing side by side. It was about sharing the same faith, the same purpose, and the same trust in the one who controls all outcomes. Unity in times of hardship is a powerful force. The believers didn't let fear divide them. They didn't turn on each other or allow blame to weaken their bond. Instead, they supported one another, comforted one another, and reminded each other of Allah's promises. They were not perfect people. They had their own worries and weaknesses, but they knew that breaking apart in such a critical time would only make them vulnerable. So they chose to remain united even when tensions were high and the pressure was immense. That unity was paired with deep trust in Allah. The real protection, the real victory would come from Allah's help. And when the moment was right, that help arrived, not in the form of reinforcements or sudden wealth, but in the form of a powerful wind and unseen forces that scattered their enemies.